Now we can go ahead and get started.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. And I think I certainly know everyone in this room, and nice to meet everyone virtually as well. I'm Kimberly Baptiste with Bergmann, and Samantha Aldrich is on the virtual meeting as well. And we've been working closely with the town on the development of the form-based code. So I know this is going before the town board next week. So I'm hoping we can use this evening just to better acclimate everyone to the code, answer any questions, and I'm going to provide a little bit of context because I think that's important for folks that maybe haven't been as ingrained in the process as others. But really the goal of this is just to talk about the regulations and how it will be implemented by the planning board and the town board moving forward. So Sarah, can you pull up the PowerPoint? Perfect. And you can head right to the agenda slide. Get that up. So as I just mentioned, today, I'm going to give you a quick recap and overview, and then really walk through the elements of the form-based code, talk about the tools that we are putting together that will help you with implementing and reviewing projects that come forward, giving you an example project and how it would work from a process perspective using the form-based code, and then questions and comments. And given this is a fairly small group, I would say comment and question, interject at any time throughout, and we can pause if there's any content that you want to discuss in further detail. So if you can skip right to the next slide. Again, this is just contextual. So this is showing the current zoning in Uptown, and just, as everyone remembers, the form-based code is really based on recommendations that came out of the Uptown master plan. So the next slide is showing the character areas that were identified as part of the Uptown master plan. Showing 332 as a commercial mixed-use corridor, and then the area along Fighter Hall Road also as mixed use. So as we started looking at regulations to help facilitate the vision in the Uptown plan, it was determined that a form-based code was the best approach. The key physical recommendations that came out of the Uptown plan really focused on infill development along Route 332 in a manner that would help to promote improved and enhanced pedestrian and bicycle accessibility, and then also looking at mixed-use development opportunities, really focused around Blue Heron Park, and increasing density both along 332 and on those vacant parcels surrounding Blue Heron Park. The purpose of the code update, as I already mentioned, really is to facilitate and advance that vision for Uptown. So the zoning update process began in late 2019. Like many things in 2020, things slowed down a little bit, but we generally held, a fairly regular series of meetings with the committee to keep the project moving forward. We did very early on, back in 2019, discuss approaches for the zoning update. So we did talk about doing, just an update based on your traditional zoning code. So creating a new district. We talked about the value of design standards or guidelines as an overlay, which you're already implementing here in the town. But ultimately the committee, which is the Economic Development Committee, who we primarily worked with, really saw the value in a form-based code because of the flexibility it affords developers and the ability for the town to really dictate their design preferences as part of future development. So the overarching elements of a form-based code, again, regulates the form of buildings and the form of development sites as opposed to the actual land uses. So definitely gives developers and property owners a bit more flexibility as it relates to land use decisions. As I mentioned, the focus really is on design and performance of the site and continuity with the vision that the town has for this area. It allows for a lot of flexibility. It's very clear in what the expectations are from the developer side. And it does, although it doesn't regulate uses per se, there are specific uses that are prohibited, and we'll talk about those in just a minute. So the organization of the code is really broken down into 6 primary elements. So the code itself, the code document itself, which hopefully everyone has a copy of, and I can share if anyone wants to, in the room, wants to skim through a copy. Give some background context and an overview of the form-based code. We'll talk more about the specific elements in this section of the code. It has a section that clearly defines the review process, has a section with terms and definitions. And then there are really 3 sections that really focus on what are the regulations that apply to new development in this area. Important to note, this will be adopted as a standalone document. So essentially creating a one-stop shop for developers specific to properties in this area of the town. So developers come in, they're interested in the property, or a property owner comes in, what can I do to my existing site? They get this document, and really everything they need to know is contained within this document. So again, section 1, the overview of the form-based code, starts off with an introduction of the district itself. So there is one form-based code district, which includes all of the colored area on the screen. And then there are 2 distinct sub-areas within that one district. And there are just some subtle differences in regulations between those 2 sub-areas, but also a lot of the regulations are consistent between the 2 sub-areas, which is why the latter 3 sections of the code are broken into regulations applicable to both areas, and then specific regulations for the area in red, which is really focused on the 332 corridor, and regulations, that yellowy orange color, which we're calling the mixed use sub-area. Also in this section, we talk about rules of interpretation, fees, exemptions, how it relates to the town code, non-conformities, nuisances. So all those elements you would typically have in the standard zoning code. But again, because we wanted to create a single standalone document, we have transferred a lot of this same content over to this document. So rules of interpretation, this just provides guidelines on who's really can enforce the provisions of the form-based code, and the town zoning officer is ultimately empowered to interpret and enforce the form-based code, and obviously the planning board, the zoning board, and the town board also have a role in that. Administration fees, this section of the form-based code is duplicated from the town code, so we did not create any new administration fees or any new regulations associated with that. And you'll see this happens a couple times where, you know, in talking to the Economic Development Committee and town officials, you know, we're told this is working well for us now, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. So there are definitely some consistent elements, and again, just copied over so people do not have to bounce back between the 2 documents. Exemptions. So there are a number of activities that are exempt from provisions of the form-based code. So just regular maintenance of an existing site or building, repair of materials, you know, a cracked brick on the facade, you can go ahead and address that and update it. Resurfacing an existing surfaced parking area, or if you are doing something to a building that is solely for the purpose of providing ADA accessibility. Upon adoption of the form-based code, the regulations within this document will supersede any of the existing provisions within the town code for this geographic area. So if there is something that comes up that is ultimately not covered in this, but covered in the town code would apply. But for any content that is addressed within the form-based code document, it would supersede the town code. A really important component of the form-based code is compliance thresholds. So at which point in a various project are we, as the planning board, as the town board, the zoning officer, going to sit down with an applicant and say, these are the sections of this code that you have to comply with. So in the left-hand corner or the left-hand column of this table, you can see all the potential actions that might occur. You know, a completely new development, the expansion of a building up to 50% of its existing gross building square footage, over that ratio, exterior remodels, installation of parking, installation of new signage. So all of those kind of trigger activities are noted on the left-hand column, and then all of the key regulations, and they're numbered in accordance to how they are numbered within the form-based code itself, are listed in all of the other columns. If there's an X in that column, it means that project is required to conform with that section of the form-based code. So when reviewing an application initially for completeness, this is going to be an important first table to review. And we will be providing a checklist to the town for use by the planning board, for use by the town board, for use by the zoning officer, to take that first cut at looking at an application. So the application comes in, this is the first table. You're going to go through a checklist and say, okay, this application requires these things. These are all here in the application package. Any questions on that?
I think that's really useful, that table too.
Yeah. So non-conformities, these are, ultimately the adoption of this code is going to create some non-conforming sites within this district, which is very typical anytime you adopt any new zoning that ties to district regulations. So non-conformities are allowed to continue and exist, although we certainly do want to, and there's language in the code that encourages transition to the defined standards, because ultimately we want to create that cohesive design environment. But they are allowed to continue until they make a modification that is over 50% of the assessed property value. And we've identified the appropriate party to determine that as the zoning board of appeals. The nonconformity may not be extended, expanded, enlarged, or increased. It may not be changed to another non-conforming use. So although, again, we're not regulating uses, we are still monitoring uses from the perspective of non-conformity, because there still are some non-permitted uses. So it still might apply in some situations. If a property is not used for 1 year, a non-conforming use cannot be reestablished. And if a non-conforming structure has not been used for more than a year, it must be brought into compliance with the form-based code. So those are the thresholds that will really trigger and regulate non-conforming uses.
I love how specific those are.
Hopefully it makes it easy to monitor and regulate. Because we are, again, not regulating uses, it's important that we are still addressing and making sure that we are not allowing uses to come in that will create a nuisance for quality, that impacts quality of life, impacts surrounding residents. So we do address nuisances with not to exceed thresholds that address vibration, noise, smoke, and essentially air pollution. So those thresholds are all identified in the form-based code, and again, are really just for the protection of existing town residents.
How about, if I can just jump in there, how about lighting? I didn't see that in there. Do we think our lighting codes are sufficient enough so that if we have, I'm just thinking a lot of restaurants and things like that, and they have a lot of street lighting. I didn't see that as one of the, I guess that's not a nuisance. Or can you talk to that?
We do address lighting. We address it in the regulations, the rules for all sub-area section, not as a nuisance. So there are lighting parameters within the form-based code, they're just not the nuisance section.
Okay, thank you.
With respect to like noise, is there a level or a?
There is. Go look at the specifics. There are thresholds for monitoring all of those. And we do have time limits, so is it audible beyond property lines, which we restricted from between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m.
Where is that? Ken?
Page starts on page 9.
Yeah,
goes
page
over to
9.
Page 10.
Yep.
We did add language after actually much discussion with the committee about requiring a permit for any, restaurant or nightclub to have outdoor, if they have outdoor balcony or patio space, that they have to get a permit from the town before, having band or some kind of other outdoor entertainment as well. We have in the past actually had very specific numbers for noise decibels. And we didn't, that was actually discussed with the Economic Development Committee, and they opted, because of the enforcement of that, they opted not to include the decibels.
There is some subjectivity always with those things. So.
There, yes. So section 2 of the code gets into more of the process elements. All applicants within this district are required to schedule a pre-application conference meeting to go over the submittal requirements, make sure that there is clarity on expectations, clarity with regards to that compliance table, for example, so they know, depending on what project it is, what elements of the form-based code they have to comply with. And then there are essentially 3 paths that an application could go down. An administrative approval, which is a pretty slim option of potential applications. Some applications will go strictly through the planning board for review. And then larger scale applications will go to both the planning board, town board, and then essentially back to the planning board.
Very similar to our current annual process.
So, and this is very similar to, right, the sketch plan is illustrative and generally explaining an overview of the project, what's envisioned, providing a high level scope and showing a quick graphic of what the intention is for the site or building development. And then when you get to the full application, we'll go to the next slide, the development plan side of it. This is when you really get into the full set of drawings, both existing and proposed conditions, and any permitting or other reviews that are required as part of the project. So administrative approvals, so these are those actions that may be processed, reviewed, and approved or denied by the zoning officer. So again, fairly limited in the scope of what can be administratively approved. So a strictly exterior remodel up to 50% of the building facade area. So, switching from stone to siding or whatever the case may be. But again, it needs to conform with the regulations. So you can't just come in and do anything to the facade. The facade updates would need to be consistent with the form-based code from a materials perspective in order to be approved. Any site improvements that do not have substantial changes, so they're not increasing the number of parking space, the number of impervious surface areas, and they are all of the suggested changes are in compliance with the code. Expansion of a parking lot or loading area up to 10% of the existing total square foot area. And then any utility system improvements or modifications. So a fairly tight list of potential administrative approvals. So those projects that go before the planning board and only the planning board would be new construction projects for buildings 5,000 square feet or less, or projects that have 3 or fewer dwelling units. So anything over 5,001 square feet, anything with 4 or more units is also going to the town board for review. So we have, and I'm sure everyone has seen this, looking through the draft form-based code, we have created really a flow checklist, right, that essentially takes you through asking a series of questions, yes and no, and it kind of takes you on the path that you'll need to follow. On the screen here is just the example, really showing the path for planning board review. So sketch plan submitted, then the sketch plan is reviewed by the planning board. Once that is reviewed, the applicant would then submit their formal site plan application to the planning board. The planning board's either going to review it and approve it, or review and approve it with some modifications, or deny it because it is not meeting the minimum requirements of the form-based code. And this is another example where we will be providing a checklist for the planning board, for the town board, for the zoning officer to kind of quickly identify, okay, here's the thresholds. Does it meet this? Yes, no. And you can quickly see your columns of all yeses, or if you have some no's, that would then need to be further discussed, and whether okay through a variance process or denied, and the applicant would then have to resubmit.
I think I was just going to jump in for a quick second relative to the zoning board, and you're showing here specifically on the screen, and I know this is being recorded, so people that aren't participating right now, but we don't have any representative from the zoning board with us in this meeting tonight. It's going to be critically important, Shauna, and specifically, we need your help with this, for us to talk to the zoning board about why it is that we're doing this, so they understand that we're looking for a specific type of character for this area. And we really hope that the zoning board will take these parameters into account, not just go grant a bunch of variances.
That's
Right. Agreed. And I was actually thinking about this. They may not have an August meeting, just the way PRC went. I'm wondering if it might be beneficial to do this training for them in lieu of the meeting.
Well, we invited them to tonight. That's why we did tonight. And it is being recorded. Shauna, you might have to just play it for them in front of them for their meeting.
Yeah, I guess I could do that.
That's a
So question here, for things that come before the planning board right now where there is a variance that's required, that always goes to the zoning board first. And they approve or deny particular variance. And until that variance is either approved, planning board doesn't take action. This looks to reverse that process, where it goes to the planning board first, and then if we deny it, it goes to the zoning board. I'm a little confused on that, the order of precedence between zoning board and planning board, or is this something is there a little nuance or to the process that I don't understand? Over.
So the nuance would be that the planning board is the board with the checklist of determining compliance with the form-based code, right? So you're going through and not only reviewing you're reviewing the site plan strictly from one of the things the form-based code does is also take some of the subjectivity out of reviews. So the planning board is going through the site plan for the project application, utilizing, depending on what type of project it is, the appropriate checklist, and going through essentially section by section of the form-based code and determining whether that submittal is in compliance with the form-based code. Theoretically, right, the purpose of the form-based code is if all of those columns are checked yes, that is approved. And that is part of that process. If any of those columns, as the planning board does their review of the site plan application, are ultimately checked no, this is not in compliance, that's when the planning board denies it, tells the applicant, you're not in compliance with this element. The applicant could say, I missed that, right? I missed that design element. I will change the setback from 25 feet to 20 feet to ensure I'm compliant with the form-based code. Or if the applicant says, nope, I'm not, I need 25 feet because of this reason, that's when they would have to go to the ZBA for a variance. It's a little more of an iterative process than I would say a traditional.
I guess I'm wondering if that's something that because that's something I think right now that the PRC would do prior to going to the full planning board, because they have zoning board representatives, planning board representatives, a lot of people there to kind of do a general check of the application to see if it meets all the criteria.
Well, I think that'll still happen, Gary, but it's ultimately, right, it's the planning board that will have to make the determine whether or not it's in compliance with it.
And maybe this, so we do have the project review committee built into the process that's for those larger projects that are going to the town board as well. And maybe is that something that would typically you would want to include for just those projects going for the planning board? And part of it was kind of that streamlining, right? For these smaller scale projects, you're going right to the planning board to make that ultimate.
Right, but even planning board applications still go through PRC. So whether or not it's stated, it's still going to go through
It's-
PRC.
yeah,
They make the
everything
application in
does.
the development office. And then,
Because you'll see if you go to jump ahead to the next slide, you'll see that is built in
right.
to this.
I mean, we can put on the chart, I mean, you can definitely show it, but by purely by making an application in the development office, it's going to go to PRC.
That's the group that makes sure the application is complete and has all the required, sketch plan, checklist items and stuff like that. So it would go there anyway.
But get back to Gary's point. So Gary, they'll PRC will provide that information to you, and they do that now. But technically, even now, on an application, PRC doesn't have the authority to determine whether or not the application is complete. And technically, and I know Chris Nadler and I just had this conversation recently. Technically, we don't even want the planning board, truthfully, to make a determination that the application is complete until you're ready to take action on it. That includes the completion of seeker is a
Right.
complete application, because once you say it's a complete application and seeker's been completed, that's when your clock starts under the general municipal law. So that's why we do that specifically like that. So it really, I think it's the same process in terms of that. It's just a little bit different in that, if the planning board denies the application, it gives some relief to the applicant that they could go to the zoning board to try to get the planning board's decision overturned, essentially.
And then for those larger scale projects, as we noted, so new construction greater than 5,000 square feet for 4 or more dwelling units, you can see that there is the additional town board review built into the process. So, the planning board is still looking at it first and essentially kind of providing a report and a recommendation to the town board. The town board is then reviewing it and sending it back to the planning board for formal approval.
Right, so that's where it's similar to our MUO process currently, where the town board would weigh in and they would say, essentially, yes, we believe this is in keeping with the plan. Please move forward, planning board, or have you guys bumped your heads? Please don't do this. So,
It may be good to, since this is a little bit different, in its flow, it may be good to have that training with more representatives of the ZBA and planning board. Perhaps at that meeting that Shauna referenced, they may not have anything, but maybe have that meeting and review this specifically, just so it's well understood.
and that's why we wanted to have this meeting tonight. We're hoping that more people would,
Well,
but we're probably gonna have to do it a couple times. And the good thing is tonight's being recorded, so we can
Right.
ask everybody to watch the recording.
And
Kim, have you ever done a training where you kind of take a board through a mock review?
we have a super simplified version at the end of this meeting, but I was going to just say, adding to that point, once we get you the checklists, that might be a valuable time to do kind of a mock-up and actually meet with the ZBA or the planning board, or if they ever do joint sessions where they're actually walking through one and utilizing the checklist, and they can see like, okay, what do I do here? How would I mark this? We could certainly do that. And then variances, the use variances are going to be very far and few between in a form-based code, just because we are not really saying, it's a pretty wide open from a use perspective. The only use variance you would see are uses that are prohibited. And those I would suspect would be very difficult for the zoning board of appeals to justify their approval. Now, what you might see are some of the area variances from some of the design parameters that are in here. But again, these are intended to follow your established procedures. So this process was essentially taken from your existing code. So terms of interpretation, this is pretty straightforward. There is a separate definition section within the form-based code. We did generally align definitions with the existing town code. There were very few instances where there's a duplicate term that we maybe just tweaked a little bit in the form-based code that you could certainly then take the liberty of applying that to your full town code. But those were very minimal. We did add new terminology that is not within your existing definitions within your town code, because there are some terms in a form-based code that you just, again, because of the design, the focus on design, you don't typically see in a traditional zoning code. But again, just like all the other content, if there is a difference in terminology or interpretation, the definition in the form-based code would supersede the definition in the town code. So then we get into the actual regulations. So as I mentioned earlier, there is a section called Rules for All Subareas. So this applies to the entirety of the district. It doesn't matter if you're in the red subarea or that yellow-orange subarea. These regulations, these definitions apply to both subareas, which are in totality one form-based code district. And then there are some design nuances and differences between the two as it relates to building height, setbacks, regulations. So there are a couple pages specific to each of those subareas after the section 4. So section 4 really focuses on measurements. This is almost the educational section of the code. How do you actually interpret and measure and define the regulations that are included within here? So when we're giving you a maximum building height or a minimum amount of window transparency, we also need to be able to tell you, well, this is how you measure that, right? So there's not subjectivity in how someone is saying, trying to say like, oh, here I'm, at 80% transparency because they're looking at something differently than maybe the planning board or the town board is looking at something. So making sure there's an educational element with a lot of graphics to take that subjectivity out of the equation. So if you go to the next slide, this just gives an example, these types of graphics, not going through all of them, but, again, identifies how measurements should be calculated, helpful for both the applicant as well as the town planning board and the town board. The next slide gives another example. So building elements such as awnings and balconies, as are shown here, there are some design parameters within this section as well. This is applicable to both. So it doesn't matter which sub-area you're in. If you have a balcony, the maximum depth of that balcony is 6 feet, and it needs to be at least 9 feet above the sidewalk. So those types of dimensional requirements that are consistent across the entire district. And there are some of those specific to buildings. These are just 2 of the examples. There's also those examples that are specific to the site as well. If you go to the next slide. So the site standards that are applicable across the entire form-based code district are regulations that address off-street parking, bicycle parking, landscaping. Here's where you have your lighting standards, screening, outdoor amenity space, sidewalk, dining, and drive-through facilities. So I was not intending to walk through all of the individual regulations under each of those site standards, but if in future trainings you felt that was important to go into more detail on all of those, we certainly could, or if anyone has any questions specific to regulations in these, we can certainly go back and answer those at the end as well. And then we also have sign standard requirements. So we have general requirements, and this is, you know, in many ways very consistent with how your existing sign regulations, which have been updated not too long ago as well. There's a lot of overlap, but where there are some specific regulations are those signs requiring a permit. So we are identifying awning, projecting, monument, wall, and window signs. Really not even window anymore, we took that out. So awning, projecting, monument, and wall signs is requiring a permit, and window signs, as long as they conform to the regulations, no longer will require a permit. And then all of these subtopics are addressed under the sign standards. And again, that's just that list of the requiring the permit, but just as we did with the other elements, the building and site elements provide graphic representations and requirements that are visually showing, okay, how are we calculating the size and the area of all of these different sign types? Again, we want to take out any of that subjectivity from interpretation of the code. So then the sub area regulations itself. So the first one being the 332, or sorry, jumping ahead. So the topics that are unique to each of those two sub areas are some of the lot dimensions and the building placement requirements, some elements of the building itself, specifically the height and any permitted encroachments, and then also having to do with requirements for transparency and building materials. And some of that difference is because we are promoting more residential use in the mixed use sub area. So we added some additional sub area specific regulations differentiating between commercial and residential uses, which was important when thinking about some of those design elements. So the 332 sub area, again, is that really corridor in those properties that are immediately adjacent to State Route 332 itself. But the intent of these regulations are to really foster a mix of uses, so retail, office, restaurant, and higher density residential, to incorporate and promote more pedestrian and bicycle use and connectivity, to really help to visually, although we're not physically narrowing the streetscape, by creating more vertical definition closer to the street, you know, you create that perception of narrowing the streetscape and, you know, ultimately slowing traffic and creating a more walkable, safe environment. And part of that is pushing parking to the rear of buildings and actually getting it off the corridor itself.
And can we just, because this is being recorded, it's not all of State Route 332, it's just Emerson Road South to North Street.
Yes. Yes, so just the red area on the boundary now, not all of 332. So again, we are not, unlike a traditional zoning code where you're saying, here's your district, here's the uses that are allowed. The form-based code flips that on its head and is saying, as long as you conform to all these design requirements, as long as you do not create nuisances, we don't care what you do within your building, with some exceptions. And this is the list of exceptions for this particular sub area. So single family residential detached, because it is not consistent with the vision for Route 332. I don't know if anyone would actually try to put a single family home on Route 332, but wanting to proactively address that. Adult oriented establishments, junkyards, public utility substations, manufactured homes, truck and freight terminals, outdoor storage of boats, and large scale solar energy systems is a standalone use. So there might be a solar component to another development project, which could comply with the regulations, but solar as a sole use on the property would not be permitted in this particular area. And again, not going to necessarily dive into each and every regulation explicitly, can certainly do that in future trainings if we want to go more in depth into the nuts and bolts, or answer any questions, but this is just intended to give a flavor again, the use of graphics to help people understand or correlated to the regulations underneath. The goal, helping people understand what is being evaluated, looked at, how is the planning board, the town board actually reviewing these projects for compliance. This is just showing an example of, building height minimums and maximums, and then required transparency minimum. So your checklist is going to say, is this building under 45 feet, right? Is this, does the ground floor have 75% transparency? Yes or no, right? And then the checklist, it's a very simple yes or no question. And then the checklist will give an opportunity to provide additional comment. Our calculation shows it's 73% or whatever the case may be. But it does become a very easy way to identify this. They've checked all the boxes, and it's easy for the developer too, because there's no subjectivity. They know exactly what the expectations are on the side of the town. The next slide, the 332 sub area is a little bit unique in that the number of the properties that are fronting on 332 also have frontage on Fire Hall Road. So essentially in this sub area, we are saying that because we want to foster a strong streetscape along both of those roadways, that in this particular instance, if there are properties that have frontages on both roads, they can comply and treat both of those frontages as fronts instead of having 332 as a front and Fire Hall Road as a back. So they are permitted to do that. If they choose not to, 332 is the primary street that they would have to treat as a road frontage. And then this is just an example of the signage regulations that are specific to each of the sub areas. So again, in this sub area, these are the signs that are permitted, and you're allowed up to 3 types per building. So there's the stipulations, and then there's the actual associated regulations of size that apply to these as well. And then in the mixed use sub area, so that is that area, again, within those parameters generally of, Emerson to north, that area that falls to the east of 332 around Blue Heron Park. The design intent in this area is, again, mixed uses that could be combined to a greater extent, multifamily homes, residential in general, with commercial retail uses. Again, encouraging multimodal and making sure that any new development is not impacting any other surrounding residential uses. Here, the prohibited use list is just a tiny bit shorter. You'll see it's very similar to that for the 332 sub area. The one prohibited use that has been taken off and would be permitted in this particular sub area is single family detached homes. And then again, just giving some examples of the regulations, but again, the overall format and layout of this is very consistent and very, again, intended to be very easy to follow what the expectations are. So again, you have graphics that are depicting exactly what is being regulated. In this case, because residential buildings are likely to be more prominent within the sub area, we do have separate regulations for commercial and residential buildings. Now, a mixed-use building that might incorporate, retail or restaurant on the ground floor and residential on the uppers would be treated as a commercial slash mixed-use building, not a residential building. So that would just be an important note to make as well when reviewing applications. And these are just, again, showing examples of transparency. And you can see the transparency requirements are lower for residential buildings.
I have a question.
Yes.
If that house had an attached garage that faced the front, how would the transparency calculation be affected by that? Or would
A garage would not count as transparent.
Okay, so it would just be on the house portion, that wouldn't take calculations of the garage.
Yeah. And then again, here's just an example of the signage regulations specific to the sub areas. So this type of table is found in both sub areas, but for each of those sign types that require a permit, so would require approval in order to move forward, very specific regulations regarding maximum size and other elements depending on the sign type.
Sarah's example there of the garage, Kim, that's spelled out in the text.
Well, and so because a garage door is typically not transparent,
Right, yeah.
we can, if you feel it's important to add that
Well,
as a
no,
note,
just
it's
here.
not currently noted, but that's how we would interpret it.
Okay,
But if you feel that's important to know, that's something you can easily add in.
it introduces a note of subjectivity.
Well, hopefully, if there was something built in the yellow area of a single family residential with a garage, hopefully, at least in that portion that we call uptown, we could get them to put it on the back
Well,
to create more of a community type
Or
of.
facing the side.
Okay, and I've kind of already hit on the tools for implementation, but as I've mentioned, we will be providing a series of project review checklists. So both for the compliance table, and then there will be different checklists that would apply to all those different project types. So if you think back to the compliance table, we had all the different actions down the left hand. So each of those actions essentially has its own checklist because you're required to comply with different sections of the code. So they would be personalized for each of those actions. So this is, again, as I mentioned, we could go into certainly when we get those checklists, and if we were to meet with, the planning board and the ZBA individually, we could go through, this is a very simplistic version of kind of putting the code into action, and really more focused on process. But we could certainly go through one in more detail utilizing the checklist. So hypothetical project, property size, 2.6 acres, the development's 10,000 square feet. It's a mixed use building. It's 3 stories and it's 10-foot primary setback. So this example, we're not going through all of those design parameters per se, more of a process example. But so based on those parameters, they also submit a graphic of what their building's gonna look like, which is projected on the next slide. But really then just walking through the approval, what the process would look like. So you go back to that process flow chart, and on the next slide, you can see you ask yourself the first question. Okay, is the project, does it exceed either of those thresholds? Is it over 5,000 square feet? Is it more than 4 residential units? Yes, to both of those. So right away, we're now following a path. And if you go to the next slide, we're submitting the sketch plan review, going to the project review committee. Then it's going to the planning board, and the planning board is really then taking that finer look at the checklist and saying, here's where it complies, doesn't, making notes. Even if it all is yeses in the columns, right? They might still be making notes of things for the town board to take note of, right? Here are some additional considerations that the town board might want to talk further about. And then the next slide shows, okay, yes, it complied. So now the planning board makes that recommendation to the town board. Town board, hopefully, if it's all in compliance, is then sending it back to the planning board for approval, or if not, it's obviously going on the other path that would then take it to the ZBA for a variance application. But again, we could go through that type of hypothetical in much more detail, actually going through a checklist.
Can you just go back one slide? Kimberly, just in the off chance, let's say it goes to the town board and the town board says, nope, we don't believe it complies. How did we write that in there? Just can you refresh my memory?
That is a little tricky. If
Right.
it's, right, if you have your checklist and here's what you're saying in your form-based code are your height requirements, your setback requirements, your transparency requirements, your signage requirements. If you're saying yes to all of those, and the applicant is technically meeting all of the form-based code requirements down to materials and all of the other topics, you know, landscaping buffers, there's a fair amount they have to meet, but if they're meeting those, I think it's very hard to deny an application.
It's almost more like a courtesy review and an opportunity for the town board to have some input before it begins its formal process. Truthfully, much like the current MUO. It comes to the town board and the town board says, yeah, we believe it's in compliance. Go get your approval from the planning board.
Because, you know, we're not regulating, you know, overtly, yes, we're, you know, we talk about materials and balconies and elements of a building, but we're not really defining styles or, you know, there might be something that in theory needs every regulation in here, but the town board finds completely appalling from a design perspective, right? There's nothing in here that's truly going that far to really dictate design. So that's an opportunity for you to maybe talk to the applicant and just say, hey, you know, the turquoise is not our favorite choice for this particular location. You think you could use brown, or how would you, you know, but, you know, I think you would be hard pressed to deny an application.
The term I was just going to use, you would be. I mean, if it's yes all the way down, you told us if we do this.
Yep.
Whereas with MUO currently, I mean, it's not as objective as this process would be with form-based code. So.
And that's, I think it would be a very interesting exercise to go through an actual application with the checklist. And we could do one that we know off the bat is going to fail and, you know, test everyone and see how they do with it. And then maybe do one that wouldn't be ideal, but actually meets all the requirements and just give you a sense of what that looks like.
These checklists developed already. I mean,
We have not personalized them for, we have, you know, we've done this for multiple different communities, but we have, you know, this is organized a little differently and very personalized. So we still have to go through and make them specifically for, you know, to align with your form-based code, but that won't take us long. We can get those to you fairly quickly.
what's the experience with other communities? I mean, how does it work? I mean, what?
And, you know, it was probably only 6 months ago. One of the first ones we did was actually for the city of North Tonawanda, they're downtown. And we had kind of checked in and because curious, you know, it'd been like 3 years, just curious how it was working. And they said, you know, although they had no major new development projects, it was more kind of smaller scale, you know, pieces. They said that everyone was, you know, very open to it and was following the code. In the city of Rome, they are moving forward with some large, you know, they are going to make all new projects. Well, they adopted it, so they have to, but they are currently working with developers that are working in conformance with their form-based code for their waterfront district. And so I was going to say the city of Amsterdam is a newer, they actually just adopted it like 3 months ago, so they haven't really had any major projects come through yet. You know, it's still fairly new in New York State, whereas like across the country, you know, the city of Buffalo, their entire city, not just a neighborhood, is a form-based code. You know, so there are some city of Rochester is now updating theirs in their zoning into more of a form-based code template as well.
Is that like the whole East Ave area? Is that all form-based
I
code
think
now?
it's going to be the way it's moving. It's not going to be the whole city like Buffalo, but looking at a larger area. So it's definitely a direction more communities are going in. And most communities, unlike Buffalo, are doing it for like this, a very targeted, you unique area where there's a very specific vision for how.
Kim, I didn't hear you say what city it was that it's been 3 years.
The city of North Tonawanda.
North Tonawanda. Okay, got it. Thank you.
This looks very, very well developed and detailed, and will certainly do much to improve the appearance of the uptown area and avoid the Henrietta look. There's a lot of references to bicycle traffic, enhancing bicycle and pedestrian traffic, and various bicycle amenities. But I was wondering if there's any specifics as far as bicycle paths. If I'm in the city of Canandaigua and want to ride my bike uptown to a coffee shop, how would I travel? How would I go?
So the one thing a form-based code is not going to regulate is the public spaces, roadway infrastructure. So that's where it really marries with projects, like active transportation plans, transportation elements of the Uptown Master Plan, with the goal of, ultimately having that infrastructure in place from a transportation network perspective, and then the private development and the requirements for bike racks and other amenities on site are starting to complement that larger transportation network. So it's the chicken and the egg.
It is. Gary, I don't know if you know or not, but we also have a complete streets policy. Mr. Finelli here, sitting next to me, is chair of the Planning Public Works Committee. Every time they're looking at a road reconstruction project, they're supposed to be taking into account the complete streets policy associated with that. And then also, Kimberly mentioned the active transportation. We work very closely with Kimberly on a number of joint projects with the city of Canandaigua, and that's one of the things that we're talking about is exactly the scenario that you just referenced. How would you get from either downtown to the lakefront or downtown up to uptown, whether it's a bike or walking or whatever the case. So more work to do on that, but we're definitely thinking about that.
Good. Certainly something to explore. You're looking at the 5-foot setbacks, there wouldn't be a lot of room going up a converted sidewalk, certainly. So I'm glad people are exploring that.
So question from me, and I love this idea. I love the form-based code. I can envision in my mind driving north on 332 and having, shops and boutiques and coffee, everything on both sides of the street. And I think this would be much easier to implement, I guess, if we were working with a blank canvas, but we're not. There's particularly on the 332 corridor, there's very little vacant land, if any, there at all. And all the businesses that are there right now do not conform to this form-based code. So I'm just wondering, what's our strategy? It's going to be pretty expensive, I think, a large investment on those companies that are there, buildings that are there to, rebuild their building where the parking lot is and put their parking lot where the building is, or something of that nature. What is our strategy to try to, reconvert all these buildings that are there right now? So 20 years from now, I don't know, 30 years from now, I don't know how long it's going to take, that we ultimately get our vision of what we want.
And I think that time frame is probably accurate. This
I
is
think it
not
is
going
too.
to be a switch.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, that happens overnight. But I think, part of the goal of this is, as businesses start to evolve, change, they will slowly be required to come into compliance with the form-based code. And then you hope that some of that momentum, right, rubs off on some of those existing businesses that maybe aren't changing, but are looking to, essentially up their ante to better fit in with some of the other investments that are occurring around them.
Well, and if I could just piggyback on that. So, obviously on this specific stretch of 332 right now, we have a lot of car dealerships. And actually in the Uptown study that we did that was a precursor to the form-based code, was one of the things we've been talked about is what a futuristic car dealership may look like. And And Randy Farnsworth was involved in that in a lot of those meetings. And I'll use him as an example specifically. So for instance, Cadillac is now saying with their new dealerships that they want a boutique store where maybe you only have 1 or 2 vehicles and you schedule a test drive and then you come and do that. And then maybe the cars are somewhere else and then that sort of thing. For instance, so with yeah, it is very much. I mean, history is repeating itself, right? But so in that particular scenario, Randy's telling me he very well may have to build a new Cadillac dealership. So he could then build it on the front of the property in compliance with exactly what we're looking for, and then have the vehicle somewhere else. I was actually just recently in Washington and Washington, DC, and I was amazed there was a Saturn dealership and a Cadillac dealership right downtown. It was a storefront. It was a storefront. You go in, you look at all your colors and everything. There was one car inside, and then you schedule your test drive. And that's kind of what they're doing. But to your point, Gary, it's going to take a long time. It's not going to happen overnight for sure.
Yeah, and I guess I'd just be concerned about some of those owners that, you know, just say, oh, too much, it costs too much to do all that. So I'm just going to do 20% change, then another 20% change, another 20% change, then to the point where he just decides to just let it go because it's just too, and then it becomes run down and an eyesore in that area. So that's something I'd be a little concerned about.
And that incremental, we could add in language that addresses, you know, any changes occurring over a 3-year period, right? Contribute to
That's
that
right.
total of a 50% threshold,
Mhm.
which is, you know, one of the compliance triggers.
Right.
And that would be a very easy statement to add if you wanted to, you know, if there were folks getting creative about avoiding compliance, right? And kind of tried to stagger their applications.
There's always going to be people that get creative. We've also had quite a few different meetings. A lot of these landowners have been in meetings with us. I'll give you another example. Lelit owns where the Enterprise dealership was at the corner of Airport Road and 332, and that's where the Enterprise rent-a-car was, and there was an office building next to it. He actually went ahead and tore down his buildings. If you go by there today, and he is trying to sell the property, but he has said all along, I want to build something more in keeping with what you're planning here for Uptown in the form-based code. So he went ahead and tore down his buildings. And not everybody's in his situation, but we've had really good response from the landowners in this area. As landowners change, yes, anything is possible, and I'm sure people will be looking for loopholes where they can.
And when we did meet with stakeholders, and we had a really great turnout at the initial meeting, just presented this concept. You know, there were a handful of developers, whether, you know, future or existing property owners within the district, that were really rallying behind the idea of the form-based code and, you know, the benefits from a developer's perspective.
I do think that suggestion you had of a creeping type
The
of.
incremental, yeah, the cumulative change.
I think that would be something we should build in. Because we do know that developers are very creative. We try to maneuver around things, so.
The other big change in thinking for us with this is mixed uses on a single property. We don't currently allow that at all. There's nowhere anywhere in the town of Canandaigua where we allow that. So this is a huge change where you can have multiple uses on a single property.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing, particularly in this area, Uptown area.
And that's where some of that infill can happen and be successful. Does anyone else have any other questions for Kimberly? Anyone on Zoom or here?
Nope.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited about this.
Thank you.
Kimberly, can we just talk about next steps here? Because one of the things that I was thinking as we were looking at this and going through this is actually, looks like somebody just popped in the waiting room. This is actually a rezoning of all of these properties from their current zoning to form-based code. So that's another step that we're gonna have to take, public hearings, actually updating the zoning map and everything else. So there's a few more steps in this whole process.
A whole new way of thinking about it.
And so, right, the meeting next week, you're just kind of opening.
We're opening and then
Setting
continuing
the
a public hearing,
hearing.
right? Just kind of starting the process, making it a little bit more visible.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly.
And I
Thank you
know
for
I've
going through
looked
it
at
all.
this many
Thank
times,
you, Kim.
just an extra step of understanding for me too, so I appreciate this.
The zoning, no matter how much you look at it, you learn something new every single time you open it.
For sure. And then, so this was recorded. We'll have the
Yep.
recording. Hopefully we can get that soon, maybe tomorrow. Okay. And then we'll post it to the YouTube channel and send the link out to everybody so they can start viewing it and everything.
Yep,
right?
I'm
Okay.
hoping by lunch I'll have it out ready for everybody.
Okay.
And Sarah, I don't know if you want to compile, other questions come in, if you want to compile them or send them to us, whatever you think is the best. approach.
Right, and if some comments or questions come out of the public hearings too, we'll make sure you get those.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks for going through it all with us.
Great.
Kim.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody on Zoom for coming.
Good night.
Thank you. Have a good
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I did have some extra printed copies of the PowerPoint. Would you want those, Sarah, in case anyone, or do you not want more paper?